Hey everybody, it's Professor Snart here, checking in again for video announcement number 2. I promise that this will be substantially shorter than video announcement number 1. So it is Wednesday morning when I'm recording this. The good news is that I have a nice window in my office. The bad news is that I have to look out at a pretty bleak, snowy, kind of like half ice, half snow landscape right now. So drive carefully and walk carefully. I nearly lost it the other day. Anyway, Wednesday morning when I'm recording this, so I'll take a quick look at due dates, and then I'll jump us into our next unit, which is Unit 2. So again, kind of an awkward start for us with most classes actually starting on like Tuesday, if you meet Tuesday, Thursday, or even like Wednesday if you're in a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class. But the term actually started on Saturday, so our class, because it's online and we don't have that physical meeting day in place, was opened up on Saturday. So the first unit really not super intensive as far as work goes, kind of designed intentionally that way. Most of this early stuff is just getting things sort of set up, getting people used to navigating our course and how it's all kind of arranged and stuff like that. And even the first unit is really just kind of like introducing yourself. It's not course content per se. So let's take a quick look at our due dates then. Again, it's Wednesday the 23rd when I'm recording this. So we have everything, all the main stuff due in our first unit, which again is mostly just setting up your website or your portfolio, right, that we're going to call it. We'll use that throughout our term here. And then posting the URL, the link that you create, to the discussion board that we would see in Unit 1 there. So pretty straightforward. And then the only thing you have to do in your portfolio for right now is just build a kind of like introduction or about me page. Talk about yourself a little bit, pretty informal. Throw some pictures on there. Obviously, you can take advantage of the web format and include video or audio or whatever interesting stuff you want to throw in there. Again, just a way for us to kind of get to know each other, hopefully start to associate names and faces, right? Which is really, I think, an important thing, but doesn't happen so easily when we're not like literally physically seeing each other all the time. What else was I going to say? Something, but I can't remember. I'll come back to it if I remember. And then we have our kind of dual due date system here. So once things are posted here, once you're done posting your own work, you can jump in to the discussion board again, follow a few other people's links, check out their portfolios. What I was going to say is, in addition to the names and faces thing, sometimes it's just interesting to see, you know, what maybe high school people went to, or what hobbies or sports or whatever activities they do, what career plans or majors they've got, or maybe transfer ideas that they've got. Again, just sort of find those interesting connections with various classmates. So that so for our second due date here, and again, we're doing this no later than the Sunday, January 27th. It doesn't mean that if you've done this part and there's enough people who've also done it, even by now, like Wednesday, you can't jump in and do the replies and then sort of wrap it all up. Just don't say this so early that you kind of forget about this part. So by that Sunday, then, all replies would be due, and we're kind of on to the next unit. The other thing that you might notice, or you get sort of in the habit of, is maybe finishing this up. You know you have these to do, but maybe you haven't done all of them or even any of them. But you can always begin, right, jumping into here. So you find maybe some overlap between kind of wrapping this up and then getting into the next unit. So there might be a little bit of overlap, again, because of the way our due dates are set up. And I certainly don't expect people to go in and do like the whole thing at once. In fact, I sort of recommend against that. I'd said in my opening announcement just about sort of scheduling time for yourself and blocking it out, which I think is really important. Just to think in terms of this as if it were a face-to-face class, you would be in the classroom, pardon me, for 3 hours, you know, roughly a week. So 3 50-minute sessions, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, from 10 to 10:50 or whatever. And so that wouldn't even include like so-called homework time, you know, reading the stories or whatever materials that we're looking at in our class. So I would totally admit that like our first unit here is probably not going to take people like 3+ hours. Although if you figure both getting kind of oriented to the course, checking out the syllabus, maybe getting a textbook and getting that all set up, plus doing the work in here, it's probably still not 3 hours, but it's an investment of time. You can't just do it in 10 minutes. As we get a little bit further, though, you really will want to budget chunks of time, right, sort of separated from each other, so you're not jumping in on Thursday afternoon, let's say, and trying to read through all the assignments, read through all the stories, do whatever quizzes and stuff is in there. It will be unenjoyable, right, for one thing. But also, I think the work will suffer. And like I said, I think before, grading or looking at the stuff is no exact science in our particular discipline here. But I think if we are just honest with each other, we can usually look at, the work across 5 or 10 people and probably make pretty good guesses about people who've managed time effectively and sort of, done, let's say, the reading, but then let the assignment sit for a while so your brain can kind of work on it and then maybe come back to it a day later, versus the person who's just like sort of done it all at once. Blackboard does timestamp stuff as far as like when you're posting to the discussion board. I don't really look at that necessarily, unless the work just seems like done incorrectly, like you didn't read the instructions or just isn't very good, right? I do kind of then glance, is it being posted right up against the due date? Again, time management. Okay, so a quick then jump back to Unit 1. Make sure you've signed up for our little remind text alert system here. It's pretty useful. If you're a Verizon customer, I've recently heard that Remind and Verizon as two corporate entities are not getting along very well. So if you're a Verizon customer, you might not get texts that are part of our Remind group, or maybe you can't even sign up. I'm not sure how it's affecting people exactly. But I would actually just recommend getting the app. It's free. If it's annoying to you, you can always delete it later if you want. It gives you a little better functionality even, but it'll work fundamentally the same. You'll still get our little text alerts, and I'll start sending those out a little more regularly as we get deeper into our class, doing some of the course content stuff. Just a reminder about library cards. Even if you think you've got one, it's good to make sure that you don't have to renew it, because the worst thing is when you're at your computer, you're not on campus, you're ready to go and do some assignment that requires the card, you've got it because it's in your hand, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh, it's expired, and then, pain in the neck, right? All right, so setting up your portfolio, again, I won't go through this in a really granular way, making sure that you just follow sort of the instructions here, posting your link to your site, up here on the discussion board, just clicking into it, and then at the bottom, like it says, once you finish yours, you look at all your classmates. We don't have a huge class here, but reply to at least 4. And it may seem like 4 is kind of a lot, like isn't 2 enough? Probably 2 is enough, but this is the way that we kind of talk to each other, especially as our class gets underway. So I feel like talking and looking or getting to know more people is actually beneficial. And it's not a huge investment of time. Again, this would normally be 3 hours of your week just sitting in the classroom. All right, so that brings us to Unit 2, much more of a content unit. So as part of our intro to lit here, we're going to cover a variety of genres or types of writing. We're going to start with short fiction, pretty familiar to most people, in the form of the short story. I always like to start our unit with kind of a reminder of what the objective is, like what's the point of what we're doing here, so we don't get so lost in the weeds of the actual stuff that we forget, like, what is the big picture? Why are we doing this? It's not just busy work or to fill the time. Couple of reading assignments here, a story called Flight Patterns by Sherman Alexie, and one of my favorite, both authors and of her works here, Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been? Both linked to our e-textbook, but again, you can find these in the print version just by looking at in the index. A couple of brief comprehension quizzes. These are just multiple choice, not my favorite thing. Obviously, you can just have the book open. They're not really high stakes kind of things. The purpose is more, it helps to make sure people are actually reading the material, although it would be hard to do the course without doing that. But also, I hope that the quizzes kind of draw your attention by asking certain questions to certain aspects of the story. So they're almost like reading guides in a way. You're just interacting with them as a quiz. Again, you can have the story open. It's not like some high stakes test that you've got to do, and et cetera, et cetera. All right. The next piece of our course here is more like a virtual handout. So this is not something that you have to interact with, or it's not an assignment, but it's kind of like a set of vocabulary terms that we want to really keep at the foreground as we begin to read and write about and do stuff with the various short stories, but also other works that we have that we'll cover in our course. Most of the terms are probably pretty familiar to you: character, setting, conflict, and then there's some notes here about kind of another level of detail that go within each of these slightly broader categories. Some of them are more obvious than others. Some of them have more gray area than others. We could debate, for example, what a major versus a minor character is in a story. So, even the stories we'll read today, or not today, but in this unit, I want you to really be looking for not just, okay, they have characters, kind of we know that, but how would you label, like, which is the major, or which are the major ones? What are the minor ones? How do minor characters function as still important elements in a story? Who or what is the protagonist? And that doesn't necessarily just mean the good guys, but it's kind of like the center around which the story orbits, you might say. The antagonist, right, not necessarily the bad guy, is just the one who opposes the protagonist or kind of reacts to what the protagonist is doing. Narration, first, second, third. So the I voice, that kind of distant omniscient where you have almost like the camera just watching and telling what's happening. And then the rarely used second person you, like a choose your own adventure, you turn the corner, you open the door, etc., etc. Again, just stuff to be watching for, like what stories are told from the first person, which are told from that third person, and what effect does that have on you as a reader, right? Producing either distance or a certain kind of closeness and even bias in the narrator. F. Scott Fitzgerald's famous Great Gatsby is a fantastic book for many reasons, but one of the most interesting aspects is that it's narrated by Nick Carraway, that first person. So we get like a sort of truth about what's happening and a sort of semi-unbiased, reading of the other characters, but it's really not, right? It's all filtered through that particular lens or his particular way of seeing the world and the people in it. All right, setting, conflict, and then the one we're going to focus on in the assignment below here is this, what's called Freytag's pyramid, or really sort of like triangle here. And if you've run into this before, or you're just seeing it for the first time, you might be like, really? The guy became famous because he drew a pyramid with some sort of flat ends on it? Not exactly, although kind of, actually. So he was a 20th century theorist. He wrote about literature and stuff like that. And he obviously did more than and expanded way beyond just the little diagram that we have here. And truthfully, even the terminology is not super important. You can find it slightly differently on different, versions of this thing. It's really the theory of the thing that we care about, and then its application in practice in the actual stories that we read, right? So again, it's important sort of to be aware of the assignment that you're going to do and this material even before you're necessarily reading the short stories. And one of the interesting things here is this part of it, right, is he developed this and applied a theory or a model to the short story, keeping in mind that the short story is actually a fairly recent invention as far as like literature writ large really goes. The earliest form of literature, again, quote unquote, is like oral storytelling. And even that is a bit of a contradiction because literature is a term that derives from other terms that imply like written letters. So to have an oral literature is almost like a bit of a conflict. But that takes us way back, right? Thousands of years when people told stories as a way of making sense of the dark and scary world that they were a part of. Fast forward, and the short story is really only a couple of 100 years old, which still a long time, but in the grand scope of things, it's a fairly recent literary invention. And so the idea of the play goes back much further, although not as far, but certainly back to, I'm sure you've read or heard of, right, ancient Greek plays that are still famous today and still being produced, being read in classes and all that kind of stuff. So he sort of took the idea of the classical 5-act play and applied it to a theory of the short story where this exposition, the kind of explaining or setting the scene part, would be like Act 1. Things kind of ramp up in Act 2. We have the moment of conflict up here at the climax, the peak of the pyramid in 3. And then things sort of tail off and we get either a nice resolution and everything is tied up, or, as is more often in modern short stories, we don't really get that clean of an ending. Okay, so I'm going to go down here to the assignment. Again, lots of explanation. We're going to start a new portfolio page. There's a little walkthrough about how to do that. There's the pyramid again. So basically what you're going to do is draw, and I would suggest doing this. You don't have to do it that way. It's just kind of easy to like see. Do it big, because you're going to take a picture of each of your maps, one per each story that we've read, and then post it to your portfolio page. So we're going to build a new page, post a couple of our pictures to it, and then do a little explanation. Again, ample, well-developed, not just a sentence. Include direct quotation from the stories. And so what we want to see then is to apply the theoretical pyramid, or the theoretical shape here, where that sort of Act 3, right, the moment of highest intensity or conflict, happens like symmetrically, perfectly in the middle. So we're looking not for how writers conform to this perfectly symmetrical setup, but really how they both include all of the pieces. You'll find them, or hopefully you'll find them, but they shift the sort of the center point around, and you don't really shift the place that these things occur. You just shift their relationship to one another, if that makes sense. So begin to look for, like, how does exposition work? How long does it last in the two short stories? Is there a nice long kind of drawn out moralizing close to the stories, or do they sort of end abruptly and they leave us hanging? And then we want to think about, like, why do authors manipulate the shape that way? What effect does that have on us by having the rising action take a long time, or happen really quickly, or having the falling action like drop us off a cliff, or like be long and drawn out? Maybe you might read a story where that conflict moment actually happens like way early on, so it's almost this like skyrocket upwards, and then everything kind of tails off after that in a really slow way. So there's no exact right answer, clearly, and that's what's interesting, is once we get down to the, look at other people, you might obviously have read the same story, pulled even some of the same details, but shaped them differently because your understanding or your reading of the story is different. Again, we need all the pieces. They need to follow in this consecutive order, but they don't need to be grouped in this really symmetrical way. So your so-called pyramid or triangle is not going to be symmetrical. Neither of the stories really do that exactly, unless you can make an argument that they do, but I don't really think so. So draw your map, make it nice and detailed. That's why I suggest hand doing it or doing it big, so you have room to like put direct quotes in, or make like ample notes, so you're labeling each of the kind of moments here with what's going on. Again, make sure that you hit that publish button in your portfolio. The work gets saved, but it doesn't become part of the public website until you hit publish. Post the URL to our discussion board here, and then reply. Take a look at as many as you want, but reply to at least 4. And again, this is more meaty stuff, so replies are a little bit easier, because we're all kind of reading the same story, but maybe coming away with different conclusions about them. All right, one last quick look at our due dates here. Again, wrapping up Unit 1 soon, doing the replies, and maybe a little bit of overlap as people get started on this next part. Hopefully you're getting used to the layout of the course, and also you get kind of used to our due date system and how it overlaps and stuff like that. Okay? So again, hopefully you're settling in and getting used to the whole kind of arrangement here. And if you have any tech problems or issues with anything else, or confusion about some of the material, by all means be in touch with me. I'll talk to you soon.